Chernobyl Exclusion Zone. Covering roughly 1,000 square miles in northern Ukraine, this area was established entirely in response to the catastrophic nuclear reactor explosion in 1986. Following the disaster, massive amounts of radioactive material were cast into the atmosphere, settling heavily over the surrounding forests and towns. Residents were evacuated, leaving behind a frozen landscape of abandoned Soviet-era buildings, rusting amusement parks, and decaying infrastructure. Today, radiation levels have dropped significantly in some parts, allowing for brief visits, but the soil and water remain deeply contaminated with long-lived isotopes like cesium and strontium. It stands as a profound reminder of the devastating potential of nuclear accidents, acting as a bizarre, unintended nature reserve where wildlife roams freely without human interference. Fukushima Exclusion Zone. Triggered by a massive earthquake and subsequent tsunami in 2011, this restricted region in Japan resulted from a multi-reactor meltdown at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant. Unlike Chernobyl, where an explosion blasted material violently into the sky, the Fukushima disaster involved a gradual release of radioactive particles, primarily carried by wind and ocean currents. The Japanese government drew up a complex shifting map of restricted areas based on precise radiation readings, displacing over 100,000 people. Over the past decade, massive decontamination efforts have involved physically scraping away the top layer of radioactive soil and storing it in millions of black bags. While some towns have been declared safe and residents are slowly trickling back, the areas closest to the plant remain strictly off-limits, requiring heavy protective gear to enter. Zone Rouge. Translating to the Red Zone, this chain of restricted lands stretches across northeastern France and serves as a lingering scar from the First World War. Following the armistice, the French government realized that certain battlefields were so utterly devastated by artillery fire, chemical weapons, and human remains that rebuilding was practically impossible. The ground was saturated with lead, mercury, and thousands of tons of unexploded ordnance. Over a century later, large pockets of this land remain cordoned off from the public. Farmers working near the edges still routinely dig up rusted artillery shells, a phenomenon known as the iron harvest. The sheer density of toxic metals in the soil means that the most dangerous sections of the Red Zone will likely remain uninhabitable for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Montserrat Exclusion Zone. Taking up more than half of a small Caribbean island, this restricted area is entirely the work of the Soufriere Hills volcano. After lying dormant for centuries, the volcano suddenly roared to life in 1995, blanketing the capital city of Plymouth in layers of thick ash and destructive pyroclastic flows. The eruption forced a total evacuation of the southern half of the island, rendering the region completely uninhabitable. Plymouth is now often referred to as the Pompeii of the Caribbean, with the tops of buildings just barely poking out from under meters of hardened volcanic debris. The zone is strictly monitored by observatories, and entry is heavily restricted because the volcano remains active, capable of sending searing avalanches of gas and rock down the mountainside with virtually no warning. Vozrozhdeniya Island. Once a quiet landmass in the Aral Sea, this remote territory was selected by the Soviet Union in the 1940s to serve as a top-secret biological weapons testing facility. For decades, military scientists weaponized some of the most lethal pathogens known to humanity, including anthrax, smallpox, and bubonic plague, releasing them into the air to test their effectiveness on animal subjects. When the facility was hastily abandoned in the 1990s, the retreating staff left behind massive, poorly sealed containers of weaponized spores. To make matters worse, the gradual drying up of the Aral Sea eventually connected the island to the mainland, raising fears that scavenging animals could spread dormant pathogens. Although international cleanup efforts in the early 2000s neutralized the largest anthrax dumping grounds, the land remains a highly restricted and deeply toxic wasteland. Woomera Prohibited Area. Located in the remote outback of South Australia, This vast tract of desert spans an area roughly the size of England, making it the largest land-based weapons testing facility in the world. Established after the Second World War, the region was heavily used by British and Australian militaries to test experimental rockets, drones, and even nuclear weapons. The immense size of the zone ensures that highly classified aerospace technology and long-range ballistics can be tested without the risk of civilian casualties. Because decades of live-fire exercises have littered the desert floor with unexploded bombs and sensitive military debris, the public is strictly banned from entering the core zones. Even the highways that cut through the outer edges of the territory can be abruptly closed to civilian traffic during active military operations. Korean Demilitarized Zone. Stretching across the Korean peninsula, this 2.5-mile-wide buffer strip was created in 1953 to separate North and South Korea following the Armistice Agreement. Despite its name, it is one of the most heavily fortified borders on the planet, lined with razor wire, tank traps, and watchtowers on both sides. The space between the fences is a treacherous no-man's land, estimated to contain millions of active landmines buried just beneath the surface of the soil. Anyone attempting to cross without authorization faces extreme peril, not only from the hidden explosives, but from the constant presence of armed patrols authorized to shoot on sight. Yet because humans have been entirely locked out for decades, the strip has accidentally evolved into a thriving ecological haven, preserving endangered species that have all but disappeared from the rest of the peninsula. Bikini Atoll. Lying isolated in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, this picturesque ring of coral reefs and islands was the site of 23 nuclear weapons tests conducted by the United States between 1946 and 1958. The indigenous population was relocated with the promise that they could eventually return, but the sheer scale of the detonations forever altered the environment. The most infamous test, Castle Bravo, was a thermonuclear blast so powerful it vaporized 3 entire islands and rained highly radioactive coral ash across the ocean. Today, the water surrounding the atoll is remarkably clear and teeming with marine life, hiding a fleet of sunken battleships that were used as target practice. However, the islands themselves remain dangerously radioactive, with the soil still containing high levels of cesium that contaminate the local fruit and groundwater, making permanent human resettlement impossible.